An inside look at the Palestinian Authority security forces that the United States seek to have as the backbone of a Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza after the war, and a little irony in the path of the U.S. government's efforts to oust the Netanyahu government from power. Coming up on In Focus. So Tuesday morning, Israelis awoke to the news that the US Intelligence community had put out a threat assessment for the United States for 2024. And in the section on Israel, they had reported all of the intelligence community's agencies that the Netanyahu government was looking towards being overthrown. Mass demonstrations against the Netanyahu government, they said, are in the makings. I don't know how the intelligence community of the United States might know that. I can't imagine that they would have been participating in any discussions with protest movements to try to raise them again from the dead and get them to protest to overthrow the Netanyahu government, God forbid. But they're saying that these are going to happen and that Netanyahu is just about to be overthrown and he'll be replaced by the more moderate, that is, leftist leader Benny Gantz, who was a former defense minister, former IDF chief of staff. He joined the national emergency government. He was just feted in Washington last week. And he came home, and now the intelligence community of the United States is saying that he's about to replace Netanyahu, is about to be ousted from power. So that was what we woke up to. And then a couple of hours later, Gideon Sa'ar, who is a member of Gantz's party, the National Resilience Party, the National Unity Party, or National Stateliness Party, whatever you want to call it in English. His New Hope Party is a faction inside of Benny Gantz's party. They have 4 seats. And he just announced that he was leaving Benny Gantz. He's abandoning him. He's ditching him. And he wants to be a member of the war cabinet also. And basically, he started on the right. He ditched Netanyahu, became his arch enemy, joined the left. Was a member of the leftist government led by Naftali Bennett that ousted Netanyahu from power in May 2022. And then ahead of the November 2022 elections, he joined Benny Gantz's party, brought his party into Benny Gantz's party, and they ran as a joint list. And now he's saying, bye-bye, Benny. Hello, Bibi. I'm going back home. I'm going to just be part of the national emergency government, and I want you to make me a member of the war cabinet too, because Benny Gantz is too far to the left, and he's pushing policy in a very weak need direction, and we have to win this war. So I'm joining you now as a standalone party. Let me be in the war cabinet so that we can actually win this war. So he's seemingly gone back to the right and left. And that's interesting for a lot of different reasons that I don't want to get into. But what's notable about it is that it just shows how absurd the Biden administration's claim, the intelligence community's claim, that Netanyahu's government is on just the verge of being overthrown, because rather than being overthrown, it's being augmented. So, Gideon Sa'ar was ostensibly supposed to leave the government and seek its overthrow along with Gantz at some point in the near future. But now Gantz will leave with only 2/3 of the members of Knesset that he joined it with only 8 as opposed to 12. And he's severely weakened by this because his ability to claim to be a centrist party has now disappeared, because Gideon Sa'ar was his proof. And now Gideon Sa'ar is gone. So now he's just another leftist, and he's another leftist party. And he has about as much chance as any leftist party of forming a new government, which is 0. There are a lot of things that are interesting about it. One of them is that everybody's citing these polls that are put out by left-wing polling agencies saying that, Netanyahu has collapsed, the right wing has collapsed. Everybody responded to this invasion of Israel by Palestinian terrorists on October 7th by saying, oh, let's give them a state. We are all moving to the left, when, in fact, everybody in Israel is moving to the right. But be that as it may, it's support, I could give you examples, but I'll just say support for a 2-state solution totally collapsed, completely collapsed after this. There was 51% of Israelis, according to a poll by the left wing, Institute for National Security Studies that just came out today, Wednesday, said that before the invasion of October 7th, 51% of Israelis opposed Palestinian statehood, and that's 65% of Israelis do. And that's a lowball number put out by a left-wing organization. Most of the polls show that it's anywhere from 75 to 80% of Israelis oppose Palestinian statehood. So whatever, 65, 85, who's counting, Israelis don't want it. So the idea that the left is going to take the next elections is insane. But that's the idea the United States is putting out. These left-wing polling groups are pulling out, and Gideon Sa'ar clearly doesn't believe them, because if he did, he would have stayed with Benny Gantz. And his leaving shows that those polls are just bunk. Anyway, so much for the intelligence community's capacity to understand Israeli politics or care about reality. They just want to shape it with their assessments that are totally wrong. That I just wanted to mention that. But what's notable about that in the scope of the Palestinian security forces that I want to talk about as the main point that I want to discuss in today's show is that the Wall Street Journal article about the intelligence community's report said a couple of things. First, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly stated his opposition to post-war diplomacy with the Palestinian Authority towards territorial compromise. That's true. Netanyahu, again, like the vast majority of Israelis, both don't trust the Palestinian Authority. 85% of Israelis, by the way, in an earlier poll showed that they do not trust anybody in the Palestinian leadership. Actually, it was 87%. That includes, obviously, the Palestinian Authority. So his view is supported by 87% of Israelis. But anyway, so Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly stated his opposition to post-war diplomacy with the Palestinian Authority towards territorial compromise. The second point that Joel wrote, Netanyahu's viability as a leader, as well as his governing coalition of far-right and ultra-Orthodox parties that pursued hard-line policies on Palestinian and security issues, may be in jeopardy. Distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public from its already high levels before the war, and we expect large protests. We, the US intelligence community, all of the agencies, just like they all said that Russia had intervened in the 2016 elections, now they're all saying we expect large protests demanding his resignation and new elections. A different, more moderate government is a possibility. In the Wall Street Journal report that Joel's thing summarized, along with the New York Times report, they wrote this. Netanyahu is also under pressure from within Israel's three-member war cabinet, which includes his two major rivals, Benny Gantz, leader of the National Unity Party, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. If elections were held now, polls say that Gantz would easily defeat Netanyahu's Likud. Gantz hasn't ruled out working with the Palestinian Authority after the Gaza war and working towards a Palestinian state. Netanyahu is at odds on the issues with the White House, which favors the Palestinian Authority role in post-war Gaza and renewed diplomatic discussion on an independent Palestinian state. So as we said, the first assertion that if elections were held now, polls say Gantz would easily defeat Netanyahu's Likud. I showed you polls a couple of weeks ago from direct polls that were published on Channel 14 that showed the exact opposite, that Netanyahu's Likud party is polling 2 or 3 seats ahead of Gantz's party. And the fact that Gideon Sa'ar left Gantz's party shows that he does not believe the polls that the Wall Street Journal and the U.S. intelligence community are citing in claiming that Netanyahu is going to be pushed out the door very, very soon. So that's one thing. But the reason why they're so keen on ousting Netanyahu is why? Because he opposes the Palestinian Authority getting a role in a post-war Gaza, and because he opposes the Palestinian state. These are both positions, again, that are almost consensual among Israelis, certainly among Israeli Jews. And it's just the United States doesn't want to believe it, so they keep saying that these, marginal actors in Israeli society, like Ehud Barak and all of the retired generals who represent, maybe altogether maybe 7 mandates in the Knesset on the far radical left, that they are Israeli society, because that's who they talk to. They don't want to talk to normal people. So, they believe these polls that don't seem to reflect any of the sentiments that are brought forth in other public opinion polls that aren't partisan. But they want to believe them because they want a Palestinian state, and they want an Israeli leadership that will do what they want, which is bow and shuffle. Now, The question is why. So first of all, we have to think about the state that they want to create. What they want to create is a police state. It's not just that all Arab states are more or less police states. Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, all the Jordan, they're all police states. The most powerful actors in these states are the army, or the secret police, whatever, the intelligence services. Those are the strong men in Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Iraq and not in Lebanon. It's different because it's Hezbollah. But whatever, the police forces in all these states, or the security services, they're the most powerful organs in all of these states. And so they want to create a police state, and the most powerful organ then in that state would be the Palestinian Authority security forces. And at least since 2005, it wasn't really before that, but we don't have to get into that. These services have been a U.S. project. And, the United States, then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice in 2005, she appointed this general named Lieutenant General Keith Dayton, U.S. security coordinator for the Palestinian Authority. And Dayton started training Palestinian security forces and arming them and funding them in Jordan, that were supposed to be reformed, anti-terrorist, and capable of fighting terrorists from Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and from Fatah's Al-Aqsa brigades, Martyrs Brigades, which is and they were supposed to do that. And so their first major test was in 2007 when Hamas took over Gaza, and violently, in sort of a mini civil war with the U.S. Trained and funded and armed Fatah forces, the security forces of the Palestinian Authority. And that clash was a total failure for Condoleezza Rice's strategy and for Dayton's project because the Hamas just killed them. They threw them off the tops of buildings, they murdered them, and then everybody who was left to survive, they ran away to Israel for safety. The big enemy. And then when things got tough, they ran to us. But whatever. So then they moved to the Palestinian forces in Judea and Samaria. But that was the first test of the project of getting a strong Palestinian security forces that were going to be able to fight Hamas. So they didn't fight Hamas. They either surrendered to Hamas, they ran away, or they were killed by Hamas. And Hamas seized power in Gaza. So that's what happened. But just so you understand, what are these security forces? So I'm going to give you a really, really short history of Palestinian terrorism and security forces. So in 1958, Yasser Arafat formed Fatah, which was the first organized Palestinian terrorist organization that wasn't controlled by Egypt, basically, or Syria. But Fatah was founded by Yasser Arafat when he was a student in Qatar. And then 6 years later, then Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser took Arafat to Egypt, and they together formed the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which was an umbrella group that included Fatah as its largest faction. And Yasser Arafat was made the head of the PLO. He was the head of Fatah and also the head of the PLO. And then inside of the PLO, at Fatah's side, were a bunch of smaller terrorist organizations: the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, all kinds of. So there are all these other little ones, Force 17, all of these terrorist groups that were part of the PLO. And the main faction in the PLO was Fatah, which was founded by Arafat and and he continued to control it as the PLO chairman. Okay, fast forward. In 1993, Israel and the PLO signed this agreement, the original Oslo Accord. That was a framework deal for peace between Israel and the PLO. And the Oslo framework, the Declaration of Principles, what it was called, talked about forming a powerful security force or police force that the PLO would form it, and they would be in charge of law and order and cooperating with Israel in counter-terrorist operations. Okay, so they were supposed to be essentially Israel's subcontractor for fighting Palestinian terrorism in Judea and Samaria. The fact that a lot of the terrorism was carried out by Fatah itself, which is the core organization of the PLO, is neither here nor there. The idea was that Fatah was no longer going to be a terrorist organization, and now it was going to be an anti-terrorist organization because peace, peace, peace. So in the event, what happened was that they took from the cadres of Fatah, they built these various militia, these Palestinian Authority security forces, the General Intelligence Service, the Preventive Security Services, all of these different ones, police, whatever they want, the customs police, all kinds of, like, there were about 15 at one time, different militias. And they all reported to Arafat, and they were all kind of rivals, and they were all kind of together, whatever. So he formed all of these things. A lot of them were trained and funded by the United States and by the CIA, by the MI6, by the European Union, by France, and Russia and Pakistan and all the rest of it. But they were supposed to be counter-terrorist forces. And in the event, they totally weren't. I mean, from the outset, terrorists were recruited into the Palestinian security services from the very outset, from 1994 on. The leaders were arch terrorists from the PLO. And the idea was that everybody had turned over a new leaf, and they were going to be anti-terrorists. And didn't really happen. In 1996, we had a mini war with the Palestinian security services that was incited by Arafat over Israel's decision to open up a tunnel under the Western Wall. Is a tunnel riots or whatever. They murdered, I think, 16 Israeli soldiers, IDF forces. Some of them were like, one of the ideas was we would have these joint patrols with them, IDF forces and Palestinian security forces. We would patrol together, and that's how we were going to fight terrorism together. And the first person who was killed was, the first people who were killed were Israeli forces who were in these joint patrols. They were shot by their Palestinian partners in these joint patrols that were supposed to be an expression of peace and blah, blah, blah. So they were killed. And then in 2000, the same thing. David Bibi was a sergeant in the IDF. He was shot by his partner in one of these joint patrols as well. So you had numerous instances, like early years of Oslo, 1996, and then in 2000, where the Palestinians opened terror offensives by turning their U.S.-provided rifles on their Israeli counterparts and killing. And in the Palestinian terror war that went from 2000 to 2004, more or less, Israel stopped altogether its joint patrols, its cooperation with the Palestinian Authority forces, because they were such active members of the terrorist nexus that was committing all the suicide bombings and roadside killings and all of the rest of it that killed 1,500 Israelis. So Israel cut them off. The Shin Bet declared their ostensible counterpart, the Preventive Security Force, a terrorist organization. So the Americans, at a certain point, the Bush administration, particularly Condoleezza Rice in Bush's second term, decided that no, we can't have any more of this fighting Palestinian terror stuff that Israel's doing. We're going to have a revitalized, a reformed Palestinian Authority. We're going to get rid of Arafat. We're going to bring in his deputy of 40 years, who's somehow or another going to be like the knight in shining armor. He's going to be great. Mahmoud Abbas was first made prime minister, a new job. And then when Arafat died in 2004, Abbas took over, and the Americans said, look, we have a reformed Palestinian Authority, and we're going to bring in Dayton. And then he had this revitalized Palestinian security forces, and it was great. And they capitulated to Hamas in 2 years later, totally failed in their mission. But Israel, maybe spooked, maybe under American pressure, it was the Olmert government, very far to the left. They agreed to the American request to, after Fatah was ousted from Gaza by Hamas in 2007, to reinstate the joint patrols and the coordination with the PA forces who were supposed to have been humbled by what happened in Gaza and turn their backs for real this time on Hamas and become counter-terror forces like the IDF. So Israel reinstated its security coordination, its cooperation with the Palestinian security forces in 2007. And over the years, what we saw is that their involvement in terrorism continued. So this week, Regavim, which is an NGO that does, an Israeli NGO that does really important research and reports that on land policy, on land theft in the Negev and the Galilee, Judea and Samaria by Israeli Arabs, by Palestinian Authority. And they also do a lot of really important work on terrorism research. They put out this new report on the enmeshment, really, of the Palestinian Authority security forces that, again, are trained and armed and financed by the United States, and other Western governments in terrorism. And the report is really interesting because it's all compiled from official documents published by the Palestinian Authority, by the Palestinian Authority security forces, and by Fatah, which is, again, the main recruiting ground for the Palestinian Authority security forces and also for Palestinian terrorists from the Fatah Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades. So Fatah is the nexus for both what's called the PASF, the Palestinian Authority security forces on the one hand, and Fatah terrorists from Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades on the other. And so they found, here are, I'm just going to show you 3 different announcements that are in the report. These are posters that were put up by Palestinian Authority security forces and Palestinian Authority and Fatah official Telegram pages. And so here's the first poster. It was put out in August of 2023. You see here 30 terrorists. They're all in their uniforms with their names and their unit affiliations in their titles. And then here's another one from February 18th. And here you see, I think, 48 terrorists are on this picture. And again, they're all in their uniforms with their unit affiliations. And then on February 29th, there are 51. And some of them are the same because what they found was that from official announcements that they could find in open source material between 2020 and 2023, you had Palestinian Authority terrorists, or 2024 March, carrying out, or 78 of them involved in directly in terrorist activities and terrorist attacks on Israelis, both civilians and IDF and other security forces. So you had 78 people who are members of the U.S.-funded, trained, and armed Palestinian security forces. These are the bedrock of the spinal cord, if you will, of the Palestinian state that the United States wants to form, that it's so keen to form that it's trying to oust the prime minister from power in the middle of the war so that Israel will lose it so that they can get a Palestinian state going. This terror is a terrorist force. I mean, they produce terrorists at breakneck speed. And it's not just these 78. And by the way, just so that you get a sense, this is just what they could find. This is all from open source. But I just want to read to you a couple of quotes of what the Palestinian Authority people are actually say about, who they are and what they believe in. And so after October 7th, and that 75, 85% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria support what happened on October 7th, and that's just the ones who admit it, right? They support the massacre. And afterwards, everybody was jubilant, and Hamas is great, and, they became overwhelmingly supported by the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. Over 80% of them support Hamas. And they got a lot of heat, the Palestinian Authority security forces, because Hamas accuses them of collaborating with Israel. So Colonel Talal Dwaykat is the spokesman for the Palestinian security forces. And he was on Al Jazeera in an interview after October 7th, and he was forced to answer the claim that the PA makes no contribution to the struggle against the Zionist enemy and even cooperates with it, mostly in security coordination. So they're being accused of being collaborators by Al Jazeera, which, let's just remember, is in Qatar. And so Dwaykat, defending against that allegation, what did he say? He said, "We have no objective other than achieving liberation, independence, and the establishment of a state." He expressed great pride speaking for the Fatah movement and also for the Palestinian Authority security forces. For 30 years, the PASF has sacrificed more than 2,000 martyrs, that's dead terrorists, hundreds of prisoners, among them those serving life sentences. So he's saying that since they were established 30 years ago in 1994, the Palestinian Authority, 2,000 of its members have been martyred, that is, killed in the act of terrorism. They're terrorists, so 2,000, and then hundreds more are dead. They're sitting in Israeli jails, many for life sentences. When you get a life sentence, you get a life sentence when you murder people, okay? And he, along with senior PA official Jibril Rajoub, who used to be the head of the preventive security forces in Judea and Samaria. They both claim that 12% of all Palestinian terrorists incarcerated in IDF in Israeli prisons are members of the Palestinian Authority security forces. So that's a lot. And they're saying 12% are from the U.S.-sponsored Palestinian Authority security forces. So that's an important data point as well. And then, and it indicates that the 78 terrorists that Regavim was able to locate from the documents that they poured through to see what the dimension of the actual involvement in terrorist attacks you see from the Palestinian security forces, they were able to only find 78. But among those 78, I just want to, what does it mean when they say that they're involved in terrorist activities? So here I just want to talk about 4 different ones that were involved in, murder. And so the first one was actually from last month on February 29th. If you guys remember, there was a terrorist attack at this gas station outside of the community of Eli in the Benjamin region. I just talked about this in the last In Focus. So in this terrorist attack, 2 Israelis were murdered by a Palestinian officer named Captain Muhammad Manasra. Manasra was an officer in the Palestinian civil police. According to the Regavim story, it says that he served 2 separate sentences in Israeli prisons and was released for the last time from Ofer prison in 2019. And here, on February 29, 2024, he carried out a shooting attack at a gas station near Eli, where he murdered 53-year-old Yitzhak Zeiger of Shavei Shomron, his rabbi, and Uriah Khartoum of Dolev, who was a 16-year-old boy. So he murdered a boy and he murdered a rabbi. And he was killed by the owner of a hummus shop at the gas station. We talked about that also. He was on furlough from reserves. So he killed Manasra at the site. And Manasra, again, who was a captain in the Palestinian civil police, he murdered the 2 Israelis last month. And then let's just get to the next one. So here we have Major Bar Falah. Major Bar Falah, he was murdered by Second Lieutenant Ahmed El Abed, who served in the Palestinian Security Forces Military Intelligence Service. At the same time, he was also active in the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade. So that's the thing. They're both Fatah. You have the intelligence service trained by the United States, again, and then you have the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, which is a terrorist organization. And here he is, Second Lieutenant Ahmed El Abed. He was a member of both. And on September 14, 2022, he carried out a shooting attack at the Jalamet checkpoint together with his cousin. They killed a deputy commander of the Nahal Brigade Reconnaissance Unit, Major Bar Falah, who was 30 from Netanya. And Falah, he managed to shoot the terrorists who were eventually neutralized by IDF forces. So here you have a second lieutenant who, together with his partner, were members of the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade's terrorist unit, terrorist organization, and he killed Bar Falah. And then we have the Yanib brothers. I don't know if you guys remember this. There was a few weeks where you had 2 sets of brothers who were murdered. You had the Yanib brothers, and then you had these 2 little boys who were with their parents waiting for a bus to take them to grandma's house for Shabbat in Jerusalem. They were Hillel. They were killed right after the Yanib brothers. So Yanib brothers are Yigal and Hillel Yaniv, aged 19 and 21, from Har Bracha in Samaria. And they were driving through the village of Hawara, which is, there are no roads around it yet. They're building one. So all Israelis from that area of the Shomron, of the eastern Shomron, of eastern Samaria, have to drive through Hawara to get to central Israel. So last year, there were a lot of terrorist attacks in Hawara, and the Yanib brothers were murdered in one of them, where they were shot as they were stuck in a traffic jam. And the man who killed him I think he was a Hamas terrorist. His name was Abdel Fattah Hussein Ibrahim Karusha. So he murdered them in Hawara, and then he ran away to Jenin. And the people who sheltered him included the Palestinian Authority security force forces. One in particular, his name was Captain Ziad al-Zahraini. He was an officer in the Customs Police. And in September 2022, after joining the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, he was arrested by Palestinian military intelligence for his involvement in the Jerusalem Battalion Jenin Brigade and for his role in establishing the Nablus Brigade. So he's like an active terrorist. He's building all of these terror cells, first in Jenin and then in Shechem, Nablus. But then right after he was arrested for it, he was let out and he was reinstated in the Customs Police. So basically, he's in the Customs Police. He joins the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. He sets up these terror cells in Shechem and in Jenin, and he gets arrested for it, and then he gets reinstated in his job after he's done it. So in February of last year, February 26th, this Hamas guy, he killed the brothers who ran away to Jenin, where he was met by Zahraini and other terrorists, ostensibly and presumably in the terror cell that he established. And on March 7th, Israeli forces came in to Jenin to find Horatio, the terrorist who killed the Yaniv brothers, and they were put upon by Zahraini. Zahraini was the first one who saw them come in. He identified them and he directed fire against them. He and his men unleashed a massive firestorm at the Israeli forces, who returned fire and killed many terrorists, including the Yaniv brothers' killer, Karosha, and el-Zahraini. And the Palestinian Authority security force services and Fatah both issued glowing tributes and eulogies of Zahrainis, who again started in the Customs Police, joined Al-Aqsa Brigades, set up 2 cells, one in Shechem, one in Jenin, sort of fired from his job probably when Israel came to them and said, hey, you got this guy and he's setting up terror cells in these 2 cities in northern Samaria. And so they fired him, but then they reinstated him when nobody was looking. And then he intervened and started shooting at Israeli counterterror forces who came into Jenin to find and arrest the guy who had killed the brothers. And then finally, the last one that I'll give you now, and there are 78 of these guys, Lieutenant Colonel Daoud Abu Zubaydi. So Zubaydi is a well-known name in Israel because Zakaria Zubaydi, his brother, was the head of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade's terrorist group in the Palestinian terror war that went from 2000 to 2004. And like today, the city of Jenin was a major hub of those operations. Zubaydi is from Jenin, and he was responsible for the murder of a lot of Israelis during that period. And he was, for a while, he was the most wanted Palestinian terrorist. So Lieutenant Colonel Daoud al-Zubaydi is Zakaria Zubaydi's brother. He spent 12 years in an Israeli prison, and when he got out, he joined the security forces, the American-funded, trained, and armed Palestinian security forces as a lieutenant colonel. And on May 13, 2022, IDF and National Counterterrorism Unit troops surrounded the house of a wanted terrorist in Kfar Burkin, which is by Jenin again, and with a game of arresting him. He's a wanted terrorist, so they surround his house in the Burkin village to arrest him. And during the operation, the IDF forces exchanged heavy fire with Palestinian terrorists, one of whom, Daoud al-Zubaydi, shot 47-year-old National Counterterrorism Unit fighter Noam Raz, who later died of his wounds. And then Raz, just so you know, he was a total hero, he was like Superman, whatever. And so Zubaydi was hit by Israeli gunfire and died of his wounds 2 days later. And then after he was killed, and after he killed Noam Raz and he was killed by Noam Raz's comrades, they had this funeral, tent or whatever that they came, that people come and visit to celebrate the life of this murderer. And among the visitors who came to the mourners for this terrorist was none other than Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas and other senior leaders. He's royalty. This terrorist, this arch-terrorist who was 12 years in prison, came out, got lieutenant colonel rank, because what would you do to a terrorist released from prison other than, give him a lieutenant colonel rank in your security forces and give him a gun and let him go back and kill Noam Raz. So that's the security forces. And again, it's very important to note these aren't like minor players. If the United States has its druthers, then these people will be coming in and being, providing law and order in Gaza and everything. And what they are is terrorists. And what we see is just as, from the outset, essentially, from 1994 until 2005, when Condoleezza Rice decided that she wanted to have this reformed Palestinian Authority and these reformed Palestinian security forces. So today, the Palestinian security forces are a terrorist organization. Albeit they're trained by the United States, funded by the United States, and armed by the United States, but they're still terrorists. And they, as Talal Dwaycott said, they have the same goal as Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Iran and Hezbollah, which is the annihilation of Israel. And so they get international legitimacy and support because from time to time, they'll cooperate with the IDF in carrying out counter-terrorist operations, mainly against people that they don't like. But when everybody's gaze is turned, they are also working hand in glove with Fatah, and Fatah's terror arm, the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, and also with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. One of the things that the Terrorism report showed was that, when Israel isn't in an area, it doesn't matter if it's Gaza since we left Gaza in 2005 or in areas of Judea and Samaria that we don't operate in, immediately those areas become dens of terrorism. So, for instance, in 2021, as an act of goodwill or confidence-building measure or whatever, Benny Gantz, who at the time was defense minister, he made a decision to stop all IDF counter-terrorist operations in Jenin, including in Jenin refugee camp, which is like a den of terrorists. Okay, so this was September 2022 or something like that. And then over the intervening months, 2021, they built up a massive terror infrastructure in the areas that he had, in a confidence-building measure, decided that Israel wasn't going to do anything there anymore. So they built missiles that they started to shoot into the Gilboa area for the first time from Samaria. They built weapons productions lines for everything from RPGs and machine guns to just whatever. And so that's what they were doing. And then Jenin became a hub for terrorism. And as night follows day, right? So you had terrorists emanating from Jenin that carried out murderous terrorist attacks all over Israel in the spring of 2022, and that was that's just how these things happen. You let go, and then the terrorism explodes. So that's what happens. And then I think like last year, the IDF carried out a major terrorist counter-terrorist operation in Jenin in order to reassert Israeli security control over Jenin after Benny Gantz let go of it because he wanted to make peace with the Palestinians, and he believes that the Palestinian Authority is moderate and the Palestinian security forces are partners, and it'd be great to give them control over Gaza after the war and obviously give them a state. So what we really see exposed by this Regavim report on the one hand, and Gideon Sa'ar's decision to ditch Benny Gantz, who's supposed to be just about to take over from Netanyahu, who's just about to be booted out of power and join Netanyahu, is that the whole U.S. strategy of, trying to oust Netanyahu in order to form a Palestinian state, it's just like doomed to failure. Like there's no way that it can succeed. And it can't succeed because it ignores reality both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. On the Palestinian side, they say, oh, look, we can, the only problem is Hamas. And Hamas is like this terror group that, has nothing to do with the Palestinians. The Palestinians, they're great. They love peace. They love whatever. And it's just Hamas bad. And in Israel, everybody's a leftist except Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is mean, and he and Ben Gvir they're like ruining everything because they don't want a Palestinian state. And in both cases, the Americans have it exactly wrong. So I think, just as, I think the likelihood that they're going to succeed on the Palestinian statehood is really just as likely as they succeed in ousting Netanyahu. because, and I don't think that they're going to be successful in either case, because there's a reason why Israelis are rallying around Netanyahu. It's not because because they love him. You know, everybody's very angry at everybody in charge on October 7th. There's no doubt about it. But they trust Netanyahu more than they trust any of the alternatives to actually see the certain victory, right? Because look at Gantz. I mean, he's the alternative, right? And he's willing to accept a Palestinian state and empower these terrorists to take over Gaza. And the public is not. And that's why, you know, in the more credible polls, you're seeing that Netanyahu is leading Gantz and the Likud is leading, and that the undecided are people on the right who are just even further to the right than all of the currently existing parties. So, you know, and that's what Gideon Sa'ar wants to tap into when he's ditching the left and joining the government. And by the same token, the thing with the Palestinian Authority, that it's going to be moderate, that you can moderate it, that you can reform it, that you can revitalize it. You know, we've been there, done that a million times, and it never works, because at the end of the day, what they say in places like Al Jazeera is the God's honest truth, right? They really do feel the same way as Hamas does, in the sense that their goal, their objective is the same that it always was since Arafat formed Fatah in 1958. And that is the annihilation of the Jewish state, and that terrorism is their strategic means for doing so. That's what they are. That's what they've always been. That's what probably they always will be. And any American pipe dream about having a revitalized Palestinian Authority is just, it's just an effort to hide reality from the American policymakers themselves, who are making these ideas into American policy, and hope that if you hope and pray enough that something will give and that reality will change, that it actually will. And it doesn't. Israelis are as determined to survive and persevere and to thrive again in this war as they ever have been. You know, and that's unchanging. Israelis are dead set as a people, and always have been, to survive and to make a go of it here. And that's why we're demanding victory, because we know that there's no future for this country without it, when the Palestinians as a people have always been organized around the concept of annihilating the Jews and annihilating the Jewish state. There's nothing changing about that. There's nothing that's changed about that. And any attempt to pretend otherwise is doomed to fail, because reality is what it is. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today. I tried to make this short. Didn't work. Oh, one last thing, a correction from last time. I said that Itamar Rabinovich was the Israeli official who was approached by senior American officials who wanted to know the mechanics of overthrowing the government of Israel, the New York Magazine piece about it. But actually, the official that was approached by the Biden administration was unnamed in that article, and Itamar Rabinovich was somebody that the author, Noah Tarnakovsky, I think her name is, from Haaretz, turned to for an expert opinion on the Israeli officials being asked by American officials, how do you oust Netanyahu from power from a mechanical perspective. Anyway, I guess you go to the ballot and you vote him out of office, and that's it. Really worked for it. Okay, I'll talk to you guys later next week. Take care.